Hello, my name's Lewis Donald. I'm the Trust Safeguarding Manager at Stowe Valley Multi-Academy Trust. And in this episode of Safeguarding Days, we're really pleased to be joined by Marina Kitchen, Service Manager for Early Help and Targeted Support Services at Warwickshire County Council. Marina has recently been appointed to a newly created post within Warwickshire County Council, which brings together the work of early help, targeted support services, the MASH, and assessment and intervention teams all into one portfolio. In this episode, we speak to Marina about early help in Warwickshire, her experiences of safeguarding children, and together we discuss the challenges of safeguarding post-COVID-19. So Marina, thank you so much for coming on to Safeguarding Days today to speak with us about your role, what the local authority is doing and where it's going, and also about early help as well. So firstly, as I say, thank you. Secondly, you just want to start by telling us a little bit about your role, what you do for the local authority and where the local authority is going, really.
Thank you, Lewis. I'm really pleased to be here. So my role is Service Manager for Early Help and Targeted Support Services. And within that area, there are a number of teams. I think it's helpful if I break that down for you. So under Early Help, we have strategic lead for all the children's centres in Warwickshire. I have a team of early help family support workers. So we have overall 30 full-time equivalent family support workers across the county, and that includes 6 seniors. And they're located within 5 district teams. So those district teams being North Warwickshire, Nuneaton and Bedworth, Rugby, Warwick and Stratford. Attached to those locality teams, we have the targeted support officers. Historically, they were called early help officers, and before that CAF. So that's around the actual assessment of early help needs, so more the formalised early help need. We also have in that part of the service what we call the early help monitoring service. And they're the people that make sure that all of our timescales are met for our early help pathway to change plans, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And priority families, which is nationally known as troubled families, is part of that team also. So that's our early help team. Then targeted support are more sort of delivery of services behind the scenes. So we have our targeted youth support service. We have youth workers that go out and about, do detached work and direct work in schools with young people. We have a team called Different Futures, and that's a very intensive family support service that support mums predominantly, but also fathers, where they've had a baby removed to child protection, and those children are subsequently adopted. So they work intensively with that family to ensure that the parent doesn't have another baby that is going to be removed. And quite often the mothers choose not to have further children because we've really intensively worked with them around their mental health, their drug and alcohol addiction, housing issues, debt issues, employment. So they really do move on. Yeah. We have a team called the Syrian Families Resettlement Service, and we're a team that when young people and their families are relocated to England from Syria, they're relocated across, there's a proportion of them that's located across the country. We receive them, we support them, help them integrate them into the service in Warwickshire. And finally, we've got Family Group Conference, and that's a service that works with families to find their own solution through mediation techniques and a wider family conference where you bring extended family together to discuss the family's issues and for the family to come up with an action plan. So we have a large service, as you can understand, but very much focused about making sure that we get support in for families very, very early in their journey.
Which I think is really important, and one of the things that we've picked up on as we've started our new term of curriculum training for staff is that idea of staff having that obligation to provide early help at the earliest possible opportunity. Have you seen since the COVID-19 pandemic an increase in the amount of referrals that are coming through for early help as families start to work through financial struggles, job loss, and the broader survivorship of this pandemic?
It's a really good question. I think we're starting to see that now. As lockdown happened, we've been very surprised actually, because the families that we work with very closely who we thought might struggle really didn't. And we found that some families who would be classed as having quite, multiple vulnerabilities have coped very, very well. I think some of the stresses in their lives were removed with lockdown, and they had an opportunity to almost press the reset button. And other families that we thought would cope well haven't, and they've really struggled with the concept of being locked down and also having their children at home all day. And I think we can all appreciate what that means when families are trying to work from home with their children at home, fear of loved ones being alone, fear of the illness itself and COVID itself. So we've had a mixed bag, really. We've worked really hard to make sure that we've connected with our families through COVID, and to do that we actually did some different types of work than we've normally done, which is quite interesting. So we've linked with the shielding hubs, and we found some families through the local authority shielding hubs, as in the district and borough councils, who hadn't been working with anybody who had multiple vulnerabilities that we've started working with.
Which I think is really important, and it actually, I think it ties in nicely with some of the work that schools are doing at the moment about trying to extend the outreach of schools. And where traditionally schools have just been a part of the community, I think without sounding cheesy, it's safe to say that this lockdown has really kind of broadened the school's outreach into communities, and they've very much become part of that community. I know in some of our schools we've had staff, as we would describe now, literally safeguarding from the front door, engaging with families, trying to support them best they can through a completely different world. One of the challenges that staff find is that when they are working closely with families, they're not quite meeting that threshold for social care intervention, but they know they need support and just need that extra set of hands almost to help guide that family through these next steps. Is early help the right thing to do then? What's the best way to staff to access those pathways of support?
It absolutely is the right avenue. And interestingly, in late 2018, actually, the Early Intervention Foundation relaunched their definition of early help, which brought it bang up to date with practice that had been happening for many years, which is that early help is it goes up to the point of formalised intervention. So, that could be before formalised child in need or before formalised child protection or children that become looked after by the local authority. So before that point is where we need to make sure that we put the right early help support in place. And we've redesigned our services over the past 18 months to make sure that school colleagues like yourselves can really get access to early help much sooner, without formalised processes being in place from an early help point of view even. But you're absolutely right. Recognising the needs of children early and acting as early as you possibly can brings benefits for both the families and yourselves. For practitioners, it means that what we're dealing with families is much less complicated. Often, much sooner, it means that other people can step in and support and help the family, as I mentioned earlier, with family support workers. And it's also sustainable. The sooner we get early help in, the more sustainable that the turnaround in the family and the support can be. And we're massive advocates of actually pulling in family members to support them and putting a community around the family that needs that early help. But also from a cost-effective point of view, it is really beneficial to everybody, because the sooner we get that support into families, the less ingrained it becomes and the easier it is to turn the families round.
Absolutely. And in terms of working with other professionals as well, one of the kind of highlights for me of a really successful early help process is the involvement of not just the kind of your immediate family, but the wider people involved in the kind of sphere of influence around that family. Where do you see the role of other professionals, though? Do you think that having additional professionals in that team around that child is a good move? And who would you kind of suggest? How should school consider who they should be bringing around the table to support the family?
I think, again, that's a really good question. And I think it very much depends on the needs and the presenting issues of the family. So where there are parenting support issues or behaviour with the child or general, family functioning, family support workers are an amazing resource to give the very earliest advice and guidance, right up to giving sort of direct one-to-one support, so depending on the spectrum of need. But we have a whole host of different providers in Warwickshire that are able to step in. And I think what's really important is that we don't overload families, and we don't make sure that we put lots of family support around families from different multi-agency providers and sort of swamp them, because that in itself can be anxiety provoking. I think often it's more helpful to really focus on one or two key areas, the priority areas, get the right people in place, put the right support in place, and then, reprioritize and refocus on the action plan. The action plan should be absolutely timely, and that doesn't have to be a formalized action plan, as we would talk about in the early help pathway to change. And I'm happy to talk about that in a moment to sort of expand on that. But we have developed something called the Triage tool in Warwickshire, which is available and transparent for all our colleagues. And the Triage tool really starts to make incredibly clear, open and transparent the threshold for services document, which is a statutory requirement, and as has been in place since 2018, and we're just updating it. And what we've done is created a really fantastic triage tool, so you can see the needs of families based upon the level of complexity, and that can really help practitioners to hone in to what it is that they need to focus on for families' needs very early, and that can often identify which practitioners we need to pull in to support the family at that time.
You mentioned there about that triage tool, and it's something that we're trying really hard to embed in our trust schools. For other professionals listening into this episode, where can they find that triage tool, and is it something they can access? Where would they go about getting hold of that?
So the early help triage tool is already located in the children and families web pages under early help. So when you look at the actual children and families web pages, you'll see lots of really beautiful bright coloured tiles with family images on it. And I think it's the bottom right hand corner, if I'm not mistaken, is the early help one. And if you link into that tool, all of our documentation, from the guidance notes, downloadable documents, the actual pathway to change, all of the documents is there. The threshold for services document is currently being updated, and that will then be found on the Warwickshire Safeguarding web pages. But the triage tool for early help is already available and it's already there.
Great, thank you, and we'll make sure to download that and include that in the resource bank for this episode. Building on that, we spoke about the pathway to change there. How important is it that staff know that pathway and know how to use that to the benefit of both them as a professional and the family that they're supporting?
It's the roadmap, and I think that's, it's incredibly important that all staff have an understanding of what the pathway to change and early help looks like in Warwickshire. I would say that certain staff need to be designated to be the people who are trained in delivering this with families, and we do have some training, which is 2-hour training, and it's virtual, so practitioners can literally link in and get the training to know how to actually complete one of these tools. But the pathway to change has replaced previously what was the CAF, which was the 19-page yellow document. If people have been around a long time, they'll remember that. That was the National Common Assessment Framework tool. In Warwickshire, it was then replaced to be the Early Help Single Assessment. And this has subsequently replaced that. You can see the sort of evolution. The importance of the pathway to change is that it's based upon restorative practice. And restorative practice is an evidence-based theory of change. And so there are questions within the pathway to change that really help everybody, to be honest. But specifically, we're talking in this context about children and families, understand what their current situation is, so what's happening now, but they then also unpick as part of the assessment, so who's impacted, what needs to change, and how do we get there. So the process of working through really works with families and practitioners to know where the journey travelled. So practitioners knowing how to sort of articulate that to families is quite important, because it demystifies and takes any fear away.
I really like the term used there. We described it as a roadmap, because for me, that's when I think about early help. I very much kind of align my thinking there, which is around that idea of you're taking that family on a journey, aren't you? You're taking them from a time where that both professionals and the family are recognising that things aren't quite how they'd like it to be, and the children aren't necessarily flourishing, and the family aren't flourishing in the way that they would aspire to do so. And that idea of taking that family with you and working closely together as you kind of move through that journey, but with so many options available to you. You've already highlighted today that idea of bringing in external partners that can support families in a really bespoke way. I think that's a really important and really good way to think about it. One of the challenges that we've seen since the return of students is that increase in concerns around mental health and self-harm. I mean, when I think about this, and at the beginning of the year, as we started to see those increases in concerns, For me, it was about recognising that actually students have been exposed within the home to things that they never had before. They're hearing their parents and carers and guardians talking about financial struggles, but in the same way that they're being almost left at home as the nature and the result of this lockdown. They're being left at home to do their own learning. They're being given access to devices in a way that they haven't before, where they're accessing their learning online. All these significant changes have happened to young people during that school closure, and inevitably we're now seeing the impact of that in respect to their mental health. From a local authority point of view, what advice would you give to designated safeguarding leads and staff that work with children around identifying those early signs of mental health concerns? And is there anything the early help system can do to support that, or support children and families through those experiences?
Again, really fantastic questions, and I think there's two arms to this. One is about the identification of need with the child, and the other thing is about matching the right service to the child's needs. And I'll go back a little bit, if that's okay with you, and explain a little bit about what Warwickshire are doing. So in my service, we're running a suicide prevention and self-harm task and finish group, and we have representatives across all of our service in children and families, as well as part of early help, so the whole service. And we're actually looking at now what we can do to upskill our staff and help our staff recognise and support young people who are at the highest level of need, so are showing sort of suicidal ideology. And the reason I link that to self-harm is because, you know, we do know, don't we, that children who are self-harming can be at greater risk of suicide because of, you know, accidental death. So recognising and taking self-harm seriously is really important, very, very important. I think one of the things that we can all do is create a culture of openness and non-stigmatizing self-harm. So if people feel like they're not okay, it's absolutely okay to say they're not okay, and have you know, people and signposting people that they can come to if they're not feeling okay. Having the right signposting services around, so if young people do raise the concerns, you know, as members of staff, where to go. And one of the things I would commend to your reading is going back to the Children and Families web pages, Family Information Service web pages, because again, we have a tile there. The whole tile is relation to mental health. And there is a huge amount of information there in relation to child mental health and also adult mental health. So knowing where to go, knowing, you know, not feeling frightened to actually talk about it either. So where self-harm is identified, know the route map in school, but knowing it's okay to talk to the young people about it.
That's certainly something I'm going to take away from this conversation is that phrase you used there. We said a culture of openness, and it'd been okay to say it's not okay, and to say that, and to recognise that you aren't okay, and that's absolutely fine. So I will absolutely take that away. So in terms of the lockdown then, and the kind of school closure period, it's not all negative, and we have actually seen in some of our year groups, especially our older ones and our sixth forms, that they've really embraced remote learning and embraced this almost element of independence that's been thrown upon them. And as a result of that, we've been able to do things like we're doing now, this idea of kind of online safeguarding CPD episodes, and that's a real positive area that we've taken from this. In terms of your service and the service that you provide families across Warwickshire, have you picked out any positives from this closure period, and as a result that you think you'll stick with?
Oh my goodness, loads. So the glass is always half full despite what we're dealing with. We've had some massive successes. A colleague of mine was talking to me about assessments for young people who are in the Youth Justice Service, and how successful it's been for those young people to engage with their workers online. And actually the digital aspect of doing assessments, our young people have absolutely loved. And obviously moving forward, we'll be looking at a hybrid model, because obviously face-to-face practice is as equally important. But in early help, whilst lockdown happened, we couldn't do face-to-face visits, as you're quite aware. So what we were able to do is deliver all our support online. So I'll go through what that actually means. So we've delivered parenting programs, full parenting programs called Malachi online with groups of parents. We have developed very short courses for 1 hour around routines and boundaries. And we specifically did that because we were hearing from schools that children who were coming back into school were struggling with routines and boundaries, because that had been one of the casualties, shall we say, of the lockdown. And so we're able to deliver that, and we've done that very successfully. But in terms of direct delivery to parents, what we discovered is a lot of parents didn't want to do the direct delivery on Teams, for example, but they really did like FaceTime on WhatsApp. They liked email, they liked text. So we developed a whole new way of working. So we already have a telephone helpline, which is 01926 412 412. So what we found a pattern of is parents would ring and say, I need support, please. But can you please ring me back, or can you please text me? And so what we found is our workers responded very quickly to the needs of the families. So families who wouldn't talk in front of their children, quite rightly, we could have email conversation with those, or we could have text. Other family members requested that we speak to them when the children were in bed. So the flexibility of my staff meant that they would put their own children to bed and then they'd go back to work and talk to families. We were able to deliver the short courses, and we would say to families, look, it doesn't matter if your family life is chaotic, you can turn the camera off and you can just mute yourself and just hear the guidance that we're giving you. So we found that was really beneficial. And part of the benefit we had is that we made very close links, I've already mentioned, to our district and borough councils. And part of the shielding hubs meant we gained very close relationships with community development workers in the district and borough councils. And when they found families that were really in need, they would contact us immediately, and we would put relevant support in. And through using our contacts around charity and community, we were able to get some families access to the internet and access to tablets, where some of the families were in absolute sort of like technological poverty, if you like. So we've had some amazing feedback.
Good. And in terms of kind of as a service, something that I'm really interested to talk to you about is some of the ways that you've adapted your training. I know that earlier in the episode we spoke about adverse child experiences and the impact of the survivorship of this pandemic that there's been on young people, and the impact of those significant changes. I know that you're in the process of developing a adverse childhood experiences course. Do you just want to tell us a little bit about that and how staff can access that? Because I think that's a really exciting opportunity.
I can tell you about the wider aspect actually of the training, because we've completely redeveloped. So due to a restructure in education services, we were lucky enough to take on the DSL, designated safeguarding lead training, in the summer. And that gave us a big opportunity really to really think carefully about how we were going to enable schools to really understand the wider partnership between children and families and education services. So we created an integrated training programme, and that brings together the DSL training, which is your initial training, the refresher training, and we have a couple of sessions of the supervision training. And we've amalgamated that with training that the Children and Family Service would deliver, specifically early help, which has been around the early help process. I mentioned this earlier, which is the 2-hour virtual training. What we also did is we brought into this picture some parenting support training, so very specifically angled at practitioners who are working in schools who could do with an update or have some knowledge around how to handle children's behaviour. So specifically about the emotions that drive some of the behaviour, but also routines and boundaries and the importance of consistency for children and the safety of boundaries. We added in there some free courses, like online we have the Solihull approach, and we have a free course on Solihull approach called Understanding Trauma, as well as an ACEs course, which is again is a computer-based learning course. We have Prevent. So we created an amalgamation and a partnership approach between our services to say to schools, here's a one-stop shop. In order to be able to top that up, really, we are organising and working with our head teacher coach. So the head teacher coach for the south of the county is an ex-head teacher called Roy Garner, who's been a head for about 28 years and just recently retired and has come to work for Early Help. And he's organising with us the delivery of a one-day course which will run twice in each consortia area. And that's going to be to understand trauma-informed practice. And we're just looking at the moment for providers that can be able to deliver that for us. But the idea of that is to really sort of help upskill and help our school colleagues understand behaviour can come from trauma, and trauma can come from ACEs. So adverse childhood experiences, and those experiences that children can experience around their parents having drug and alcohol misuse, or mental health, or domestic abuse, or even things that aren't quite so toxic, such as children having very serious medical issues themselves, or frequent moving schools or moving house, things that for the child has created a traumatic impact. And actually, what does that do for them, and the impact on them, sort of emotionally and physically as they grow? And so that trauma response can be seen in schools with behaviour, and that sort of outward expression of behaviour, or the inward sort of, how those children sometimes withdraw and turn inward. And how do we work with that? So that's something that we're going to be commissioning, and schools will hopefully from next year, God willing, with all of the pandemic that's going on at the moment, be able to access those in their localities.
And that idea, I think, of understanding the impact of significant change on young people is so important. In one of our previous episodes, we explored a serious case review from Nottinghamshire where the child in that review had done exactly that, had moved between certain areas, had experienced significant change, and staff failed to understand the impact of change on young people and how that trauma can very quickly develop into adverse child experiences, and we know some of the long-term impacts that can have. If staff want to access that training that you speak of there, Marina, what's the best way for them to find it and to get themselves booked on?
So when it's available and ready, we'll start talking to our networks about how to access that. And so we'll email all schools, and we'll explain to schools and to the consortia areas through the consortia leads and the secondary area network partnerships that this training will be available. But we'll also be telling people in our different networks. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about those networks so that people understand sort of what they look like. Every month I run head teacher forums, and so we give head teachers an update from what's going on in children and families, and then speakers come. And so what we would be aiming to do is let head teachers in their forums know that this training is coming. And we also run a number of other meetings. So we have what we call a LEAP meeting, which is Local Early Action Partnership, and I'll come back to that one in a moment if you don't mind. But we also run network meetings. So we've got Roy, who is the head teacher coach, will be setting up DSL network meetings, so they'll hear through those networks. We have family support work and network meetings, and they'll hear through that network. And we also have wider early help network meetings, which is run by our targeted support officers. So we will get people this information out through those networks, so people are, very familiar in advance that they can book on. We're running 2 sessions per consortia, so that the head teacher, the DSL, and any pastoral staff can come along to those training days, and so we can really make sure that we get as much coverage as we possibly can. If I can just go back to the LEAP meetings, I think these are really exciting progressions for our areas. So we're developing, and we're going to be running them from the last week in November, first week in December, something called a local early action partnership, where we're going to be inviting the consortia leads from schools, but also leads from a whole range of different partners, such as health, the police, adult mental health, RISE for children. We're going to be talking to district and borough councils, a whole host of people, and people who come with an air of authority that they can actually make a decision in that meeting. We're going to be looking at the local data for the different locality areas, and we're going to be coming up with the 3 most sort of priority things that we need to work on, almost like a team around the town. And this really feeds into this again. So if we've got things that are coming up in your areas that we need to consider, let your head teachers or your representatives for the LEAP meeting know, so we can start to look at that. And it could be that, as you've said, Lewis, things around safeguarding, ACEs might be one of the things that come up.
Thank you so much. So we've spoken a lot throughout this episode around the impact of lockdown, trauma, supporting families, and the early help process. One thing that I'm really keen to talk about is that how can designated safeguard leads and staff that work to support children and families, what can they do? Is there anything out there that they can access to just kind of dial in for a bit of support for those families that need that that little extra bit of help? Is there anything out there that can support them?
Absolutely, and I'm really glad you've raised that, because we've done a lot of work on this over the last year or so. So in terms of parenting support, family support, behaviour, whatever is presenting to you, we have almost a stepped approach to access support. So the first port of call for some of your families, and of course what I do know is it's whether families are willing or able to do so. So it's about pulling out from what I'm about to describe the best level that supports your family. Okay, so you don't always have to start at the bottom. But in terms of universal help, so help that's available to any of our families, we have the web pages I mentioned earlier around the Family Information Service, the Children and Families web pages. We have a parent guide tile, and on that parent guide we have free online parenting courses and support that parents can access, or professionals. You don't have to be a parent. You can access that to really get an understanding of child's behaviour and child development. So for example, understanding your pregnancy, understanding your baby, understanding your child, your teenager's brain. There's a very short course around Triple P online, and there's one about understanding trauma and understanding ACEs. So parents and practitioners can access those courses. If there was something more and you wanted to talk to somebody, we have something called the Family Support Line, and that's manned by experienced family support workers across the county, based in their own locality, so they're very familiar with the localities, the schools in your locality, and what support is available to plug and sort of connect families into. And that's available from 9 till 4 Monday to Friday. The number is 01926 412 412, and they can support with, and like I said, anything that they needed to have a conversation regarding family lives and behaviour and support. Practitioners can use that also. If you've got a particular child in school who you're struggling with behaviour, you're more than welcome to phone up and have a conversation and see what support we can give you there. But we also have short courses around dealing with child's behaviour, routines and boundaries, and then longer courses. So we have the Solihull approach, we have Malachi, and we're just commissioning a whole load of other courses, such as the Incredible Years, Sleep Better, Nurture program. And all these courses are very specific about relational practice between the child and the parent, and making sure that we can grow that attachment between them, the parent and the child. If you have a family that requires further support needs or deeper support needs, that they require some specific sort of more ongoing work with the family support worker, that can be accessed through the Early Help Pathway to Change, because the family support worker will work in collaboration alongside other workers within the Pathway to Change who's been identified to support the family as part of a targeted action plan. And they can do pieces of longer term. And when I say longer term, the average work is around about 18 weeks now for one of those longer pieces of support. And they can work very closely, like I said, with other workers. What's very exciting is the fact that we are just about to appoint 3 early help social workers. And those social workers will be able to give colleagues in their communities some advice and guidance, and I'm talking professional colleagues in our communities, advice and guidance to support them if they've got any families the needs are quite complex and they'd like to to talk over some of those cases around the early help levels that might be escalating, so we can safely keep them within early help and we don't have to have those escalating up. We also have the MASH education lead, and that's a number that you can ring, get advice and guidance for cases where you're not quite sure whether you should be ringing in the MASH. And we have a whole hierarchy or a pyramid of support, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of that, Lewis, so that that can be shared
Brilliant.
amongst our families, your practitioners.
And sorry, I've cut you off there, but I think that, and the reason I am is because I'm excited to hear about this family support line you're talking about. I think that the importance of that family support line, and it being such a well-known number across not just our DSLs and our safeguarding teams, but the families that they support as well. I think that's a really, really positive step forward for those involved in safeguarding children and the families across Warwickshire. I think that it's really important that we as a multi-academy trust work closely with the local authority to share some of the amazing stuff that's going on at the moment, and it really feels like there's a real kind of breath of fresh air around safeguarding, both in the multi-academy trust world and the local authority, and I'm really excited to see how the professional relationship between local schools and the local authority grows and grows. Marina, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and I thank you so much for your time. I'm sure that staff listening into this web episode of Safeguarding Days will have really enjoyed it and taken a lot from it. In the resource bank, I'm going to throw in there a lot of the information that you've shared with us around the family support line, the MASH education leads number, but also take away some of the resources as well, the pathways to change and some of the early help work as well that you spoke about. So again, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I'm sure that we will hear from you again in the future.
Thank you so much.